Bene. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen. Sancte Laurenti, ora pro nobis, in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Bene, salvete omnes discipuli, atque discipuli. Salvete plurimum. That means a hearty hello. So why do we want to study Latin, and what are we studying when we're studying Latin? That's going to be our question, okay? This is for those who are considered in Latin principiantes. That is, folks who are just starting to study the language. Right. So the principiantes, why do we call them principiantes in the first place? Well, principiantes because in principio, right? In principio, in the beginning. Genesis 1, and St. John's Gospel, right? 1:1. In principio. In principio. A lot of times we can call beginners principiantes, folks who are just in principio, studii of the study of, right? Studii linguae latinae. In principio. Well, in initio, another synonym, in initio, all right? So you can call them initiantes, that also works. All kinds of different synonyms in Latin that works for things that work. So in principio, in initio. But as the first chapter of the book, I always recommend, Lingua Latina per se illustrata familia romana, has it. These words initially are principium and initium, right? Just like the word oppidum, or little town, oppidum. Right? Oppidum. Get that light off of it. There you go. Principium, initium, oppidum. A little bit easier to see that. There we go. Quid aliud in principio in initio, principiantes initiantes. So a few things to do based on questions of what one ought to do. First and foremost, pre-lectio, lectio, revisio. Right. Even before you're going to study something in a chapter, pre-lectio, look at it ahead of time, read it a little bit on your own and see what you can get out of it before you enjoy the aid of the teacher. Pre-lectio, right? And sometimes the teacher will also give what the Jesuits in their educational system used to call a pre-lectio, which is more like a brief description of what's about to be read. But here I'm using it in a slightly different sense. Pre-lectio, you just get a taste of it yourself before you have the class on it. Then the lectio. The big thing here is always the lectio. All right, the lectio is where you are paying attention to what you see before you and what you're hearing as it's read. The lectio. That's where it is. And you give that lectio 100%, and that may be sufficient actually for some students and for some people. And then after that, you have the revisio. The best advice I ever got in Latin was if you find something that's great, that's wonderful, either that you like it a lot or it's teaching you something that you really ought to know, then you want to, in Yoshite Miki, you want to have a revisio. That is, you want to look at it again. Revisio. Re. Just like that, you can say for again in Latin, rursus, sometimes rursum, again, rursus, well, rursum. Revisio is to look at it again, take a look at it again, a visio, have another vision of it, all right? So that's the big thing, it's all there. Yeah, that's where the most important thing is, okay? However, because, things for most people don't sit in the first time perfectly, repetitio. Mater studiorum. It's the mother of your studies, of all your learning. Mater studiorum. Repetition, the mother of learning. Repetitio, mater studiorum. Can't stress that enough. All right, repetitio, mater studiorum. And I would cap all this off with something that's not just an add-on, and it could have been put in first place, but I mean, this is a serious linguistic study too. You're actually trying to learn the language. So that's why I talked about the language itself, just kind of as a separate subject at first. But the other one is Orazio. All right? Orazio. Now, hopefully, some of you already know what this word means. All right? An oration is talking about, especially prayer. All right? Oratio. But don't forget that it comes from a Latin word, oro, orare even, and orator, the one who's a great orator. All right? It comes from one who has practiced how to say something. All right? And has prepared beforehand. All right? And so that's why in the prayer life of the Catholic Church, you don't just go off the fly. It's not mostly. It should not be almost ever extempore. Something you extemporaneously start saying without any forethought, right, or preparation. That's not the way the Church has prayed in her liturgy, in her official prayer life. What are we going to pray 7 times a day and once in the evening, according to the Psalms? The Psalms themselves, the divine office, the liturgy of the hours of the Church. So, oratio, prayer. All right, so you want to pray before and after every single time you sit down to study Latin or read Latin, or engage with it. You want to ask for the help of the Sanctus Spiritus or Spiritus Sanctus, all right, especially, and that's a prayer I'm going to be teaching to students here. The Veni Sancte Spiritus, reple tuorum corda fidelium. Come, Holy Ghost, fill the hearts of thy faithful. All right, so especially to the Sanctus Spiritus and to our Lord, who is the Verbum, he is the Word, all right. But just because there's a little bit of double entendre, a little bit of word play here, oratio also means that you practice how to say something. Okay? In Latin, you're going to get twice as much, okay? It's sort of like what St. Augustine says about the one who sings well, prays twice, qui bene cantat bis orat. If you pronounce the Latin out loud as you're reading it, more times than not, you will get twice as much out of it. It's hard to believe, but there's something psychosomatic, there's something in your soul and in your body. When you hear it, when you're having to use your mouth to and not just your eyes, but think about it, you're engaging at least 3 different organs. You're really engaging your nose as well because you have to breathe well. That's one of the big things of an orator is to know how to breathe, kind of when to take his breaths in the middle of a sentence. So if you read out loud well and with some, emotion, the motus animi, the movement of the soul, all right, movement of the spirit, motus animi. If you do that, you will get a lot more. I won't say double, the duplex, but I'll say it's a lot more out of it than just reading with your eyes alone. And people in antiquity knew that. All right, there's a time for silent reading, obviously, but I would say that's not usually your study time for Latin. So, okay. Vai, ok. Bene. Yeah, so that's what you want to have before you, I think. Those 3 things. The prelexio, where you get a sense of what's about to be taught to you before you actually read it. The lectio, where you're actually paying close attention as you're reading. And the revisio, you have to look over it again afterward. And then just see, was there anything I missed the first time? A second reading of anything in Latin, really from the beginning on, but especially the more and more advanced you get, a second reading, you will pick up so much more. It's unbelievable. My personal opinion is that that's one of the reasons why Latin was used for probably more than 1,700 years in the Church's life as the official language of prayer for the Western Church, almost exclusively. And that's because there's something about the language and the way the language works, its syntax, its grammar, that allows you to get more and more out of it, almost like a Charlotte Mason approach to language. Right? It has a level that the beginner can understand, intermediate, but you get more out of it. Even the advanced person will in every repetition of that reading. So repetitio mater studiorum. It's also a way to connect all of these in the Catholic sense is to mandare, to commit to, mandare memoriae, to your memory, memoriae mandare, preces, prayers. All right? Start with the invocations, the ejaculatory prayers, they're called ejaculatorie preces. You know, Cor Jesu sacratissimum miserere nobis. There's already, right there's a ton of grammar that you may not notice at first, and that's okay if you don't, because you want to get these things stored in the storehouse of your mind and then reflect on them later on. Cor Jesu sacratissimum. So cor, third declension, the most difficult, you could say, of the 5 declensions in Latin. Cor. Then you get to sacratissimum, you find out cor. Okay, so that's a neuter because it ends in like oppidum, principium, initium. It's a neuter word. Okay, cor sacratissimum. Cor Jesu. It's cuius cor, whose heart? Cuius cor? Cor Jesu, Jesus' heart. All right. So there's a lot, even in the shortest invocations. Ora pro nobis. All right. Ora. Orazio, pray. All right. Ora. Pro, for somebody. Pro nobis, pro me, pro te, pro vobis. And eventually you find out, that's the casus ablativus. That's the ablative case, is for whom you're praying. It's worth knowing. All right? So there are things like that. Repetition of prayers is a big thing, because then you will have in that tesauro memoriae, in the treasure of your memory, you'll have lots of things that you can pull out at a later time and ponder on, meditate on, when you don't have the opportunity to speak out loud some written Latin that you have in front of you. So I hope that helps. There were a few other questions I got that are worth talking about as well. And so one would be, if you have a good book of Latin, which for me there's certainly a best book, and one that the author worked very hard on. Lingua Latina, per se illustrata, pars prima familia romana. Cave canem, beware of dog. You don't want to overthink the parts of the book that they're in the beginning. Okay, well, even in the end. The Grammatica Latina section that's given at the end of each chapter is well graded. It's well done. It's broken up into bits that are digestible and understandable, comprehensible. So focus on the things that they're trying to teach you at that end part of each chapter, Grammatica Latina. Focus on that. Understand that well, and then you've built part of the bridge to get you from over here, complete ignorance, of Latin, to near perfection in it. The way to build that bridge across is to learn well the things that you need to be learning at each individual stage of your Latin learning. And that book right there does a good job of breaking it up into bits that you can do all in one sitting, right? For instance, especially with bridge building, because it's something I was around a bit as a kid. With bridge building, there are parts where you shouldn't leave it just as at a certain point. There are bad points to leave bridge building, where you want to finish this part before you move on, or before you let it go for the day. All right, so same way in Latin, and that's why that Grammatica Latina section is actually worth your time. It's not part of the, you could say the story, the narrative of the book, but it's part of the language learning big time. All right, make sure you, it assures you that you've understood the new things that were added grammatically and with syntax in each individual chapter. So just take that. Don't, some of the things that you think there's something I'm missing here, could be, all right, but if you've understood the Grammatica Latina, you've understood enough for that chapter. And the part that you're not quite getting or that you haven't already learned, it'll come. And just be patient with it. And so don't try to demand out of each chapter more than it's offering to you. Take it for what it's worth, enjoy it. And then as you'll see, as with most Latin learners who have used that book, they'll want to come back and reread the book. Not just because it's an interesting story, it really is a great story, but because it's well done. You get to focus on things one at a time, or very few at a time, and make sure you have them well before you move on. Makes sense. One of the other very good questions was about memorizing things. So I don't suggest cards, memory cards of any sort. If you feel like you don't mind doing it and you feel like they could help you in some way, not going to dissuade you from it completely. The only thing I would say is that with any language, the goal is that when you hear or read the word, immediately what comes to your mind is not another word in another language, but the reality. As the Latins say, the res, all right, the actual thing, the res, the thing that's being signified by the word, which is the signum. All right, the word is the signum, right, the sign. The reality, the thing that's actually being signified by the sign, the res, that's what you want in your mind when you hear the word and when you read the word. So when you hear, tabula, or when you read tabula, I use this a lot because I usually have this thing right here beside me, or I have another tabula right here as well. Right, tabula. You want to see this, or see it in your mind's eye to a certain extent. You want to see this when you hear tabula, and if I start erasing, then you want to see then what is added by that word rasa. All right, tabula rasa, rasa, one that's been erased, tabula rasa. Okay. Another question that was a very good question is basically should you be going over another grammar book at the same time or another vocabulary book or using a dictionary together with this book that I recommend, this Lingua Latina per se illustrata familia romana, pars prima. My suggestion is not to, unless if you've studied 3 or 4, even more sometimes, 3 or 4 years worth of Latin before, and you feel like you're really cruising in the beginning of this book, which can happen up until about, I find usually chapter 8 or so. The overlap between previous Latin experience and this book tends to kind of come to a head. Yeah, you might, but I would do that only after you've done everything else that the book offers you. Completed all those exercises and gotten them all correct, all the answers correctly answered. If you do that and still have some time left over and you want to go through memory cards of some sort for vocab or grammar or anything else, want to thumb through a grammar book or a dictionary, look up other words of other Latin stuff you're trying to learn at the same time, that it couldn't hurt, I guess. I want you to make the best use of your time possible, and for me that's using this great book and mining it for all that's in there. The other thing is the only I guess the only bit where for some people a little bit of frustration comes in is I do recommend memorizing prayers from the very beginning of your Latin study, memorizing Latin prayers in Latin. And that's because you'll be able to think about it, not just for your spiritual reflection later on, also and primarily, but you'll be able to think about it later on and understand some of the grammatical points that are in there and kind of hash them out if you're ever stuck without a Latin book somewhere and you want to pursue things, continue on with Latin studies. So that's a time when you might be a little bit frustrated because you don't understand everything that's going on in even a short Latin phrase, as I said, Cor Jesu Sacratissimum, miserere nobis. And sometimes you'll see in sacred scripture, miserere nostri. Why is it sometimes different? Miserere nobis, miserere nostri. Well, I mean, I could give you the explanation. That verb, misereor, can take the casus dativus, the dative case, or the casus genitivus. But, if that doesn't mean much to you at this point in your Latin study, that's okay. That's okay. Just have that in your memory. Cor Jesu Sacratissimum, or especially, in my opinion, have the sung version of it in your memory. Cor Jesu Sacratissimum miserere nobis. Cor Jesu Sacratissimum miserere nobis. Cor Jesu Sacratissimum miserere nobis. And then if you have the habit of singing that, or even saying it 3 times, right, and beating your chest, then when you read certain things, certain prayer books in Latin, and it says, for instance, to give an example, oh, that one's dying. Ter repetitur. You'll find this sometimes in Latin prayer books with the Cor Jesu Sacratissimum, or Invocatio ad Cor Sanctissimum. Ter repetitur. 3 times. Ter repetitur. It's repeated. Right? And you'll say, oh yeah, ter, non semel, non bis, ter, non quater, ter, ter repetitur, repetitio, right? Repetition, that one shouldn't be hard. And then also when it tells you to beat your chest, there are various ways that that's said in Latin. You'll read that in a prayer book and you'll think, oh yeah, Cor Jesu Sacratissimum, miserere nobis. Aha, and so when it tells you, you know, pectus percutitur, you think, pectus, pectus. Ah, yeah, pectus percutitur. So yeah, those are just some things. Getting in the habit of memorizing prayers and, you know, doing the actions that are associated with them. The Signum Crucis, in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. If you ever see that described, then you'll have that ready to understand, more readily understood by you then than it would have been had you not been accustomed to saying that prayer and to making the movements there at the sign of the cross. So those are several things just to help you get into the good habits, both good habits of prayer, you know, praying before and after study, and the good habits of language learning that are not too dissimilar from other sorts of habits, you know, whether that be in physical habits, habits of you know, athletics or gymnastics, things like that, or other mental habits, right? There were not as many questions in the beginning as I thought there might be, but I guess the one thing that came across more than anything else is that you want to temper a little bit, you know, that's calm down the desire for knowing other things you don't quite know yet about Latin. So just as with a child, you're going to ask a lot of questions, but very often the parents, and we're children in learning a foreign language, we're children in a certain sense, all right? We want to do something very particular, and that is we want to put ourselves kind of in the seat of children. And we want to learn, we want to ask questions, and that's good, but very often our parents will respond to us with, well, what you need to know for right now is that this is this, and it's a very simplistic or, you know, simplified explanation of something. That's the nature of the dialogue between those who have had a lot more experience in something, adults, parents, and what they tell their children, right? So again, not calling anybody necessarily a kid or a child, but just saying that's the way it works with language learning, the way it does throughout the rest of nature, you know? There's so much you can digest at one time, and even at a certain stage, you know, with infants handle liquid food more easily than solid food. And so it's the same way with language learning. And trust me, the same way it would be difficult on a child's digestive system to try to digest something more solid early on in life, similarly, it would get you frustrated and more bogged down if you were reaching for too much more than what this book gives you. Take what the book gives you, because it's a lot. It's more than you realize, actually. And enjoy it, make good use of it, and perfect it in the beginning. And then you've got your wings after that. As I said, usually by chapter 8 especially, you start to see just how much you've learned. You've covered a lot of the language after chapter 8. And so then, especially once you get the chapters after chapter 10, you start learning how to describe a lot of things in the world around you, and it's pretty cool. So the only other thing I thought I'd add for today was a brief explanation of the vocab and grammar for some prayers, but I will do that in a separate video, so look for that. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, sicut erat in principio et nunc et semper et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. Sancte Laurenti, ora pro nobis, in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Valete, discipuli.